So, the end of September, I was fortunate enough to have a willing group of insightful people accompany me to Boston for a week as a mission to look at the ecosystem. We hear so many times we need to be more like Boston. Well, do we? I guess was the question I was left with. How do we really understand Boston? But equally, companies wanting to work with Boston, we need to understand Boston to be able to work with Boston. It isn't just like it's different to what happens here for all sorts of reasons. So we thought it'd be a good way to try to test the feedback from that by letting each of these esteemed panel who travel with us, and a sub from Nuclear, which is great, thank you, Jan. But to put from their perspective, where would they put their company on different aspects of what we saw, whether it's funding or infrastructure or the culture. So we're going to have a sort of proposing and opposing of different places. And then at the end of that, we're going to come back to the audience to play your part and ask you to vote. So we're going to run it like a debate. I have Judge Ward here presiding. And the voting system will be, at the end, whether you choose Massachusetts over there or Golden Triangle over here. You leave by those doors and we'll count you on the way out. And after lunch, I'll tell you where we think we should put our companies. But enough from me, over to Mike.
Yeah. People might have worked out that that's probably closer to the food.
It's about equidistant.
It's equidistant, is it? Yeah. So it's like that question you put on LinkedIn, sort of like, which is the topic today. So so this house believes the Golden Triangle is a better ecosystem to grow a life science company than Greater Boston. So what we're going to do is it's kind of be like a mock debate, because I don't actually think it's going to be as antagonistic as the House of Commons. It's more like a sort of a friendly House of Lords where everybody is kind of like polite to each other. But it's interesting, sort of, this concept of like clusters. It's not a new one. Alfred Marshall in 1890 kind of like proposed the idea that you'd have specialized companies all sort of congregating in a sort of in a location, and that was sort of the original concept of sort of clusters. I think he called them industrial districts or something like that. Michael Porter, though, is probably the person who's most associated with the idea of sort of industrial clusters, sort of back in the sort of the 90s, and he's written loads of papers, sort of guy with the Harvard Business Review, etc. And he's also probably made a lot of money advising governments, etc., of how to create clusters. So we've got the sort of the idea that you have a whole bunch of stakeholders who are coming from sort of different aspects of the ecosystem, but can all collaborate together to create a sort of a critical mass. And it's interesting, sort of like looking at sort of Greater Boston and Cambridge, so the two Cambridges almost, because if we go back 40 years, Kendall Square was derelict, okay, and therefore there was a huge amount of effort to regenerate that. Babraham at the time was that pretty building and a bunch of pig pens, and I think one or two little biotech startups. Agricultural Genetics, I think, was there. I think it was Enzymatics, sort of like Chris Evans, and sort of David and you guys were creating CAT. But it was you were working out of pig pens almost, wasn't it? It was just.
Well, not before we started.
Yeah.
No, we didn't turn them into pig pens. No.
But we know sort of the aspects. So the idea is with this discussion is to actually sort of look and sort of say, right, okay, what are the sort of the aspects that people should be talking about, and sort of explore sort of, Cambridge versus Cambridge. So at least Cambridge knows it's going to win. But it depends on which one we're talking about, the original or the new one. So what I'm going to do first is, if you could very, very briefly just introduce yourselves and which organisation you're in, and then just sort of say whether you're for the motion or against the motion. So, Nick, we start with you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Nick Foster. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Metrion. We're a CRO based up in Cambridge, UK, just for clarity on this panel. I will be arguing in favour of Cambridge, Massachusetts, even though I've lived in Cambridge, UK for 30 years. But with that, over to Kat.
Hi, I'm Kat Stace. I'm Exec VP of Business Development at DomainX. DomainX is based in Cambridge, UK, and we're a fully integrated drug discovery provider offering custom research projects to organisations big and small. Today, I'll be arguing the case for Cambridge, UK, the Golden Triangle.
Hi there, I'm John McCafferty. I was one of the founders of Cambridge Antibody Technology back in Babraham in the early days. Subsequently founded a contract research company, IonTAS, making antibody drugs for clients. And more recently founded a new company, Maxion Therapeutics, addressing ion channels as a drug class, and also have jumped back and forward across the invisible academic commercial line, and I have a group at the University of Cambridge at the moment as well.
Jahal, coming from Nuclera, we are a double Cambridge-based company. We're based in Cambridge up north, and then we're in the greater Boston area as well. Biotech, life science tools, making bioprinters. So I am going to be neutral for this one.
Hi there, I'm Max Bryan, and I look after the office and laboratory team for Bidwell in Cambridge, where we're responsible for probably about 2/3 of all the kind of occupational take-up on a year-on-year basis. I also work within our science and tech group across the Golden Triangle, where we kind of coordinate bringing forward land and the development of the region. So I will be promoting the Golden Triangle in Cambridge in this debate.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to first turn to Kat. So yeah, as I sort of mentioned in the introduction, so the whole concept of an ecosystem is different stakeholders, coming from sort of different aspects actually working together. So what I'd like you to sort of explore is how do these various stakeholders actually fit together, and why Cambridge? Why are you proposing Cambridge UK as actually better fit for purpose than Cambridge Mass?
Okay, so when we're talking about sort of the key stakeholders in terms of delivering cutting-edge science, which is what it's all about in the pursuit of new therapeutics, it is about biotech, it's about pharma, it's about academia, it's also about service providers. These days we do offer cutting-edge science as integral to what we do, and that is our contribution to the ecosystem. And then, of course, around that, sort of the funding and the support. So all of that goes into that mixing bowl of the cluster. And the key ingredients that you'd need for a cluster is for it to be sort of driven by a network. So it is an ecosystem, it is collaborative. To have that diversity of organisations of different types, different sizes. To be innovation heavy. So have that real appetite for creativity and real appetite for doing different things and creating new breakthroughs. And then, of course, the universities as well. So having world standard, world leading universities to provide that talent and provide that source of expertise. The other element, of course, is accessibility. Being able to see each other, find each other, move around, exchange. And I think that's perhaps one of the areas where the Golden Triangle stands out, and Cambridge within that stands out. It's smaller than Greater Boston. And it's not all about size. Good things can come in small packages. And with that, it means it's much easier to be a big fish in a small pond rather than vice versa. So if you are looking to grow your organisation, grow your client base, be more visible, find partners, then actually, you're more likely to make an impact in that smaller pond. So certainly, as things are growing and starting, then that's a very dynamic place to be. The other element where the Golden Triangle will stand out over Greater Boston is lower costs, and I'm sure the others on this panel will comment on that as well. Also the brand of Oxford, Cambridge and the universities in London, that is a world-renowned brand, and that attracts funding, it attracts talent, and I think that's key. Also, typically compared to Boston, staff move around slightly less over this side of the pond. So if you're growing your organisation, it's important that you retain those key staff, those anchor points that are integral to supporting growth. So, and of course, there's greater proximity to mainland Europe as well. However you're working with it, it's much easier to get over there than in Greater Boston. So that really summarises where the Golden Triangle stands out. I think the other factor to consider as well is there's more than just the Golden Triangle. I know there's a panel session later today looking at other areas of the UK, and in the overall scheme of things, it's still a pretty small geographical area, so we have the opportunity to tap into that as well. It's not without recognition that there are other things that Greater Boston has to offer. So there is a very large market out there, and there is, when we go overseas and interact with other areas and other communities, then you get that exposure to other ideas and there's new ways of doing things that actually is healthy for everybody. And with things being bigger, there's more opportunity to expand perhaps, but it doesn't take away from those key ingredients that the Golden Triangle has for a growing life science company. And this is all incredibly important as we collaborate, that we can meet each other, understand each other, be close together. It is all about a network, it is all about collaboration and working together. So I would say Golden Triangle, that's where you put down your roots, that's where you grow, that's where you find your home. But of course, as you look to grow, you then might want to extend over to the other side of the pond.
All right, so start here, and then, if necessary, sort of move somewhere else.
I think ultimately it would always be necessary to expand over there, not necessarily saying move over there. If you imagine the flip side, being a young company starting out over there and then trying to expand over here, you might find that harder, perhaps, not impossible. But yeah, I think probably best put your roots down here, and then once you've actually got that stability, then try and try and crack that nut that is the Greater Boston area. It is much bigger, and the network is much harder to break into.
Yeah. I think you also make a very good point that it isn't just about the Golden Triangle. In fact, sort of the work that I do for the BIA in providing sort of benchmarking sort of capital flows, I actually count the UK as a cluster, right? The whole of the UK as a cluster. Whereas I count Massachusetts as a cluster and San Francisco Bay Area as a cluster. And actually, when it comes to sort of your capital, okay, the UK cluster is still operating as a much junior partner than, say, for example, Massachusetts, as the sort of the data that I was showing earlier on. So Nick, I mean, that sort of like nicely segues into your thoughts.
Yeah, so I was asked to sort of give some numbers around venture capital funding and why you would want to put your eggs in the Cambridge, Massachusetts basket, so to speak. And I've been in life sciences for 30 years. Most of that was at the bench, and so I deal in numbers. I like hard facts, and I like to cite my references. So thanks to Mike's company for actually providing a lot of these. But if we just take a look at the hard numbers and look at life science funding, and this is data from PitchBook from 2021. The city with the highest amount of funding was Cambridge, Massachusetts, and then in 7th came Boston. So still thinking about that cluster. The best in the UK was actually Cambridge at 9th. Okay, and then we come down to London at 13th, and then Oxford at 14th. Okay. And that doesn't include those of you that know the Boston area well. Watertown and Waltham also had 1 billion, so just below Oxford on that ladder. Just puts into sort of scale the amount of investment that's going into the Boston area. Okay. Now, my sort of pièce de résistance before you spoke earlier, Mike, Mr. Grinch here, was, at the end of the day, venture capital companies are looking to get money out of this. They're not as philanthropic as we might like to think of them. But if you look at 2021, there were 25 IPOs in the Massachusetts area from life sciences. Okay. Compare that to the UK, and you sort of said about the UK being a cluster. There were 9 in total from the UK. Now, 7 of those were from the Golden Triangle. Now, obviously, your data earlier sort of bombed my answer to that, because obviously the value that's coming out of those IPOs is not necessarily there at the moment. But equally, the VC companies are going to go where they're going to make their money back, unfortunately. And just taking these raw numbers into account really just sort of focuses. You've got to be in Boston, and there are more and more VC companies setting up with bases here in the UK so that they can have access to the talent pool here. As Kat quite rightly put, you've got excellent universities here in the UK that continually come out in the top 10. But you've got to follow the money, and that's over on the state side, I'm afraid.
So, sort of a couple of questions. First, there's a lot more competition for that money in the States,
Sure.
and actually, if you're speaking with an English accent rather than an American accent, is that going to could that work against you? So that would be the sort of the first point. So how easy is it for UK companies to be able to tap into that money?
So one of your points was there's more competition, but equally there are more VC funds available out in the States. So just some numbers, I can't read my handwriting, and I haven't got my glasses on, so apologies. But just in the US, there are well over 1,800 different VC funds, whereas there's just shy of 800 here in the UK. So more competition, but there's more outlets to go after money out there. And my feeling, and it is a feeling, is that I don't think venture capital companies are interested in your accent. They're interested in the quality of the science that you're bringing to the table. If you've got a good product, if you've got a good compound, got a good platform, they're not going to care where you come from.
So, okay, so interesting, because I've seen some analyses which actually suggest that VCs put money into businesses, but they went to the same university or the same school there. So there might be something. The other thing also is, and it was a point that Will made, was that because of where the pound is against the dollar, actually you've got a huge amount of extraordinarily valuable assets that look a lot less expensive than they did in the past. And we've seen that US money is actually coming into to the UK. So do we actually need to go to Massachusetts?
I think the requirement for companies to flip into being a US primary company has reduced significantly over the last years. Yet there's our trust government, if you want to call them that, did do great things for the strength of the pound. But I think that's short term, and there are indicators that the pound is not going to be as weak as it has been, and there are key indicators showing that that's not going to last for much longer. Mm-hmm. So I think that argument's a very short-term one, and we will get back to close to normality within the next 3 to 6 months.
Yeah. So Max, sort of this whole idea of whether things are expensive or not expensive, one of the key issues is the infrastructure there to actually be able to support the development of businesses. So, Golden Triangle or Greater Boston?
Well, if I may, I'm going to embrace the kind of festive spirit. So rather than give you the 12 days of Christmas, I'm going to give you the 12 reasons and opportunities as to why the Golden Triangle, I think, trumps the Greater Boston
Well,
area.
you've done your homework then.
Yeah, I'll be quick, and it does get quick as you go
gonna
along,
sing
like
this?
the carol.
in the form of a song.
Well, we'll see how it goes. Make sure we win. But let's start with that partridge in a pear tree, and I'm the real estate guy on the panel here. And I think, if you allow me a bit of license, that kind of, to me, equates to sustainable development. Now, the environmental standards of the buildings that we're delivering here in the UK and in the Golden Triangle are at a level of sustainability well above what is done in North America. To secure a consent in this country takes many years, and that's part of the problem in terms of actually getting them built. But once they are there, the quality of those buildings in terms of carbon capture, in terms of how they're used, and in terms of the biodiversity gain, mean that I promise you that the partridge and the pear tree will be better off here once they're built than they are in North America, where you can chuck buildings up, they have a shorter lifespan, and they are, don't get the same use as we do over here. So quickly, the two turtle doves. Now, I think that's a type of pigeon, so that's kind of communications in the old school. We're really improving connectivity, I think, in the Golden Triangle. We underestimate what's been going on here, but there's a commitment from government for East West Rail, which will complete the triangle. We have new stations in Cambridge and Oxford, both delivered in the last recent years, and more to come. And here in London, the Elizabeth line was the largest infrastructure project in Europe. So if we compare that to the aged Red Line or Brain Drain in Boston, we look very much 21st century in my books, I think. Right, 3 French hens. So, I think we have a global brand which has got 3 global cities, and they all attract international talent. London is already France's 6th largest city. And if I ask my Bidwell's colleagues, actually, on the residential desk, 50% of all the applicants on the rental desk are international. We are attracting that talent, and that's so important for the life sciences industry, that you have that balance. It's not just quality of life, it's employment rights, it's employment opportunities, it's safety, it's mobility, it's also education for their families. I think actually the Golden Triangle scores really well there. And of course, I guess we have society inequalities, but I would say that they're nowhere near as extreme as they are in Greater Boston. And we've obviously got to put effort there as well. Okay, quickly then, calling birds. We've got 4 of the best universities in the top 10. They've only got 2. So gold rings. Your gold rings go a lot further in the UK. If you want to buy a prime laboratory or space off me, it will cost you half the amount that it will to get a prime laboratory space in Boston. So you can get double the amount of space if you can find it. That is the challenge. Now, in a similar vein, the cost for scientists here with equivalent qualifications is considerably better. So I could say for your $1, you get more geese a laying. 7 swans are swimming. This is our I think to me, swans kind of evoke kind of commitment and ability to foster growth. And this is where we've got work to do, because we need to create the lab spaces where businesses not only can form, they can grow and scale up. And we've done some work in here, but we can do better. So the Cambridge office and lab market has doubled actually in size in the last 20 years. So we're not, we're not going at the same rate as Boston, but it has doubled. But the acute shortage of space for lab space is undoubtedly a handbrake on the performance of our sector. I've got to try and find a positive spin on this. So I'm going to say that actually, though, that inability to take too much space, I think now will preserve cash for many businesses. And in Boston, they've been encouraged to take a lot of space very, very quickly. And as we've all learned, growth can sound very good, but when the markets or the funders are kind of swimming in the opposite direction, it can be a recipe to actually hit the wall a bit sooner. Okay, moving on quickly. Maids and milking. I think in the budget, this most recent budget, we recommitted to the increasing of public funding in R&D to 20 billion. So look, there's some cream for us all. Number 9 ladies dancing. Well, what is clear, our North American friends, they want to be in on the party. They actually understand completely how good the fundamentals are of the Golden Triangle. And just on the real estate side, in 2021, there was 1.1 billion invested in Cambridge and Oxford in land and buildings which will produce laboratory space. Now, unfortunately, it takes a long time for that to come through, but it is coming. And they just see how good it is. So that's 9. 10 Lords of Leaping. This is a wish for me. I think we need kind of Lords or cabinet level championing of the life sciences sector George Freeman is doing a good job on his science piece, but there's more than enough lords to pitch in and really kind of centralise and sell the kind of UK global superpower of Britain better. And I guess 11 Piping is more of government, just coalescing and trying to sell our packages together. Which brings us to the last one. So 12 drummers are drumming. Our American cousins are never shy from shouting about their successes. I think everybody in this room is probably involved with the Golden Triangle. We probably all now need to start drumming our own drum a little bit louder of how good the Golden Triangle is versus Greater Boston.
All right, well done. Well done. You sort of raised the sort of the Christmas cheer. That was, I mean, some of it was a bit. But anyway, so I mean, it's interesting with what you're saying, but there do seem to be some caveats. Like, for example, it takes a long time to get permission to build here. So actually, if you were sort of a biotech CEO, or a biotech CEO came to you, sort of said, "Oh, I'm thinking of Greater Boston or Cambridge in the UK," could you honestly sort of say, "Yeah, I've got exactly what you want," or you're gonna have to wait 6 months, 9 months?
You'll have to wait out, but the positive story here is, if you'd asked me that question 9 months ago, I'd have had nothing in Cambridge on site. I now will have 350,000 square foot of laboratory space, which is on site and will deliver in 23, 24. And that's a much better situation than we were 9 months ago. In reality, they've overbuilt now in Boston and prices will start falling. They will have demand that has halved in 6 months in terms of what they're doing, whereas actually it's quite consistent in Cambridge and Oxford. So you will have more opportunities in Boston, undoubtedly, but they chuck up buildings quicker, bigger, and I would say less sustainably.
So John, one of the things that Max, I can't remember, was it 4? It was the 4, where it was the 4 of the top 10 universities. You're going to sort of argue for Greater Boston around actually the sort of the excellence of their academic industry interface. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay, well, actually, a couple of years ago, my wife was shopping with a friend, trying to choose between 2 dresses, and her extravagant friend with a wave of the hand said, "Darling, why choose?" And I guess, darlings, why choose? Well, first because Tony Jones told me to choose, and not only that, he told me what to choose. So, but I guess the reality is that people choose based on where they were born, where their family is, what university they went to, whether they like to watch television programs with a few adverts interspersed, or whether they want to watch a sea of adverts with occasional TV programs in it. But I guess that's all about that sort of personal choice, and historically people stay wherever they came from. But I guess the question is more about ecosystem, which is the best ecosystem to grow your company. And I would argue that that's the Greater Boston area. Again, world-class universities, leading hospitals, people maybe willing to take a risk, ready to maybe jump from that comfortable academic setting into the commercial world. Again, a history to see others having succeeded and achieved. And finally, money. Ultimately, none of this happens without the money. So I'd say the Greater Boston area, Massachusetts, wins out in spades on that one. I mean, how did that come to be? Well, I guess the whole biotech revolution started around about the sort of late 70s, but I think the preparedness of the Boston area happened before that. James Watson and his mentor Luria were in MIT. Wally Gilbert was at Harvard. And they began to attract talent and create an environment. There was also a great degree of competition between those places, and that can be a great driver. Of course, I experienced that as well in Cambridge, so working in the sort of Greg Winter, LMB axis, there was great competition with the guys in Scripps doing the same thing. Maybe a degree of antagonism in the early days, but like old soldiers, they all became friends in the end. So I think the stage was set for when the sort of biotechnology revolution came in the late 70s from all of that preparedness and groundwork. And also around the time that Stanley Cohen and co were coming out with the recombinant DNA technology, there was a lot of debate and deliberation around, whether this was safe. There was a Sillimar conference where people discussed this, and now the people in Boston were sort of ready to jump on this. And in fact, it turned out that there was the city mayor, Vellucci, was quite resistant to MIT and Harvard getting going with this whole new biotechnology revolution and set up this whole panel, this whole group, and was quite adversarial, antagonistic towards the idea. But the outcome was that they came up with a set of very clear guidelines, perhaps in some cases stricter than the sort of NIH guidelines. But actually the outcome was the opposite of what he expected, because it actually created a very clear framework of rules that actually made it possible or clearer for people who are investing to understand the rules of engagement, as it were. And so then we started having, I guess on the West Coast you had Genentech and Cetus and GenX, but very quickly Biogen on the East Coast sort of jumped into that whole Kendall Square area, followed by Novartis. And again, what that started doing was create seeds that led to the future. And again, I can say I've experienced that in Cambridge. So Cambridge Antibody Technology, we had a great 10 years of all these young up-and-coming people coming together, growing together, learning, getting experience. And after maybe a 10-year cycle, the sort of seeds are spread, and so many of those people are now out there either as VCs or founders of companies and so on and so on. So this was all churning away, happening there, and as I say, great communication between academia and these commercial guys. Again, I think in the UK, my early experience was a degree of resistance, almost a snobbery about, we're pure academics and you're a commercial guy. And I can see that that's changed, actually. I can see even in Cambridge, the ivory tower, that there are lots of young blood pushing initiatives to drive innovation and create companies and look for those sorts of opportunities. So I would say that's the history of the Greater Boston area. I would say they've also capitalised on that one. So local government between 2008 and 2018 putting sort of $1 billion into promoting this. Again, when that came to an end, set up another 5-year scheme to push that one along. The investors are there in 2021. There was 13 billion invested locally in 2022 in the first half of the year, 5 billion. So the money that's needed to do it, the willingness to take a risk and to follow through in that risk space. I think in 2011, 18 million square foot, that was 10 years later, that doubled, or more than doubled, to 40 million. Finally, the people, as I say, willing to go out and take a risk and maybe inspired by the history of people that went before them. And ultimately, the impact of all of that is that 7.2% of the drug pipeline in the world are from companies that are headquartered in the Massachusetts area. So my argument and thesis is that Greater Boston is the better place, the better ecosystem.
So some very good points, and I particularly that idea of because of the sort of the snobbery of the ivory towers. When I first started covering the biotech industry in the 80s, the development of companies in Oxford and companies in Cambridge was in fact in spite of the university, not because of the university. I mean, that was the sort of sense I got. However, so you mentioned some of the companies that have basically been the launch pad for Greater Boston. So you mentioned Biogen, you mentioned Novartis, Genzyme also went there. Interestingly though, none of them actually started in Massachusetts. They're actually European companies. Biogen started in Switzerland. Novartis obviously is Swiss.
So there you are, they voted with their feet.
Yeah. I think it was the fact that in those days there was access to public capital and it wasn't available necessarily here in Europe at the time. So we're almost at the end. So I'm gonna ask Joao to sort of give us his balanced, sitting on the fence thoughts while you guys contemplate whether it's going to be the Golden Triangle or Greater Boston. Okay. Yeah.
All right. So I'm gonna not mention. I think there's a lot of good points being mentioned, but I just want to sort of play out maybe a little bit of scenario of what's going to happen in the next couple of years, so you can decide on yourself which one is a better place to start. And I must say that the question here is where to grow the company, is where now to start the company. And if we talk about that, I'm going to vote for the Golden Triangle for sure. It's a lot better talent here. It's a lot easier to start a company. There's a lot of startup funding. There's a lot of accelerator that enable people to start biotech companies. Entirely different story when it comes to where do you grow the company. Obviously, when we started, we now grow into Boston, like a lot of the company mentioned. The key here for me is, and I think that's where a catalyst potential problem is. You know, it's when you say Golden Triangle. You know, what do people do with gold? They come and take it and take it away, right? I think what we need here is more like a golden shackle to make sure people stay here for as long as possible. And I think the key driver is the lack of growth fund available, which Nick mentioned a little bit, in the availability of that here. So what's going to happen, for example, what's happening to us is we do seek investment from the U.S., from Boston, from the Bay Area, from anywhere that have that level of capital investment appetite and risk-taking appetite to support us. And what's going to happen then is you then have board members, obviously non-local board members, who's on your board, and you're increasing that, and for your Series B, Series C, and all the growth funds, more and more U.S. and potential other investors come on your board, and what are they going to say? Please stay in the U.K. They were likely to say, have you considered moving to the U.S., right? So I think that is a big challenge here, and I think it's not that the UK has not enough money per se. There are a lot of the pension fund, the size of our pension funds in the UK is humongous, but the unfortunate thing is they're not investing in the life science sector as yet. So I think that is a big challenge. If somebody manages billions of dollars and able to say, look, I'm going to turn the tap on a little bit for life science, and I think that will have a lot of downstream impacts on how we can keep a lot of these life science companies who started in the UK, right? So I think it's all about the ecosystem here. And if we have these leakages of company migrating out, it's great for the company, but it's not good for the ecosystem. It's not good for the ecosystem for the long term. Right? So, and obviously, maybe in 2 years or 3 years when we have enough lab space, that we don't have to worry about the infrastructure side of things. But I think that the lack of growth fund is something that's a problem that really need to get resolved, and can be a great catalyst for keeping company in the UK.
So there's a huge amount of internal monologue there, sort of trying to work out what you're doing. So I think again, you put a great deal of thought into sort of the pros and the cons of both areas. Before we go to the vote, I'd like to to ask you to thank our panelists for their contribution. I certainly think they've given us a lot of food for thought. So that's great. So thank you very much.